Welcome to another edition of Working with Gen Z. Friends, we've often heard the old adage people join organizations, but they leave their bosses. And there is some truth to that when you're in an organization, which could be a top brand, it could be an employer where you've gotten lots of good pay and perk, but at the end, it can all be very diluted quickly if you have a toxic boss or not a good boss. Now, this is a topic perhaps often spoken at the water coolers, and people talk about it that, okay, I'm suffering with this and so on. But the reality is that if you have a 40, 50-year career, there is a chance, if you're fortunate enough to have a very good boss through all your phases of your life, nothing like it. But if by chance you do get into a situation or a patch of your life where you do have a toxic boss, what do you do, right? How do you overcome it? Are there ways to combat that? Do you simply quit? Are there ways to manage some of that? And so to talk about that very important topic, which often not discussed in the mainstream, we have our guest, Nupur Chowdhury, who's going to share some light on how are companies dealing with, and especially in the context of Gen Z, what can they do if they, by any chance, stumble into a toxic boss? So Nupur, welcome and glad to have you on the show.
Thank you, Nikhil. It's wonderful to connect with you and talk about, like you said, something that's a very water cooler conversation and to be able to openly talk about it. So thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. So I know, Nupur, you and I have exchanged several conversations in our many meetings during travels and so on about this very topic. Probably, you're reflecting on your career, I'm reflecting on my career. So I'm glad you've taken the time and you've agreed to help me with this very important conversation. So I have lots of questions, and I know you're just the person to help us with this. But before that, I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself for our listeners, our viewers. So give us a little bit of background and your story.
Great. Yeah. So I'm a girl from Bombay, and as they call, I'm a Sobo South Bombay girl, but have a career of about 15 plus years in the space of leadership development, consulting, largely working with large to mid-sized organizations in transforming their culture and their leadership. And having a grad master's from Harvard University focused on adult development, adaptive leadership. My journey has really been working with people, teams, and leaders to help them transform themselves personally, as well as then how do you kind of work around the culture. So using techniques around mindfulness, challenging traditional approaches, even to learning and leadership development in my career that I've had. I've worked across multiple sectors, multiple geographies, at clients like, Microsoft, Syngenta, or Aditya Birla Group. So work from a very traditional organizations to, MNC kind of organizations. I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, and today partnered with multiple organizations around the world to, again, facilitate and coach teams.
Fabulous. That is an impressive background, Nupur, and I'm very happy you're here today. We're going to pick on your brain to tap on the vast experience from working with large tech companies to homegrown entrepreneurial companies in India. So let's get to it. We're talking about toxic bosses here. So first and foremost, if one wants to know that they've got a toxic boss, what are some of the characteristics that one should look for to say that probably I've been pegged with a bad boss or a toxic boss? How do you identify one?
It's been interesting because the word toxic boss has been now so promoted. When I started my career about 15 years back, we didn't know what it meant. You had a boss and every manager was supposed to be good. And then you would question your own self as to, what kind of a manager, and you didn't have words for it, right? When you start a career. So I'm glad that as now the Gen Z is sort of starting their career, we have how we identify emotions, you identify the kind of bosses you have. The primary I would tell people is look for micromanagers, people who are emotionally volatile. What I mean is either they're unavailable to you emotionally, mentally, or are constantly aggressive or throw their emotions and not able to manage it. Third is people who criticize you consistently, right? So more than development and feed. We'll talk about later about the difference between feedback and criticism. But criticism, as we know, is a negative connotation to constantly belittling you and your work. And I think the last is really about when it comes to ethical grounds today. So, which leads to also ethical doesn't mean that the person's lying to you, but it's unfair treatment, whether it would come under promotion or favoritism, for example, but also using language, profanity, language that's not acceptable in a culture. So I think these are 4 or 5 behaviors that you can look out for.
Yeah, wow. You've covered many things there, and I want to come to the point about Gen Z and also your comment when you started out saying that probably for some of us, not in the Gen Z generation, just took on to the belief that when you join, you just kind of, assume that every boss is a good boss. So I think the Gen Z generation will differ perhaps in that thought, and then to be vocal about it. But let's park that for a moment. So you mentioned to us about the ways in which some of the characteristics or behaviors that one could kind of look for. Tell us now what's at the organization level, right? Hopefully this is not an org-wide culture, but even if it's, let's say, a subculture, if you got 1 or 2 teams that you end up working with, you have someone, what could be the impact for this just at an organizational level, Nupur? First, let's talk about that and then we'll dive into the Gen Z.
I think at an organization level, and I believe I like to say that IQ is not contagious, but EQ is contagious, right? So even if 1 or 2 people, 1 or 2 teams, and I've seen this, there are toxic cultures, and we've had enough examples in India and abroad. For example, Uber was an example where, the kind of emails that were exchanged and that became available, and that the whole leadership went through an overall, or even Google, and, with Satya Nadella coming in. So, and in India also, for our Indian listeners, we've had ICICI Bank, we've had a recent McKinsey suicide that happened of a 26-year-old. So I think it spreads and it's contagious. And I think that's one of the things that organizations need to be very aware of, that it's not something that can live in isolation. But I think the immediate impact in today's world is definitely high turnover, right? Today's Gen Z young employees too quickly want to leave people. And like you had started off, that people join for people and not for organizations. They join for a manager, people that we're surrounded with. So high turnover. I think overall productivity is lost because if you don't feel a connect, you don't feel belonged, you don't feel that you're being appreciated, then productivity will go down. And there are multiple reasons we can discuss about it. I think third is it stifles innovation. And today, where we're constantly looking for people innovating, and we say that, oh, the new breed of Gen Zs and generation should bring in creativity. But if you're going to be micromanaging and toxic managers, as we've spoken about, if they're breathing down their neck, then we're definitely stifling innovation and creativity. Overall, I think employee engagement, I think the last and the big one organizations need to be mindful of with today's Gen Z is company reputation. With social media, our digital natives are all out there talking. So we have to be mindful of what we're putting out there, how we're talking, so that your company brand that you've built over years does not get tarnished.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you make some good points. And I do remember the bank that you're talking about. I think there was one other bank, I'm not sure if it was HDFC, but another bank, which
Yeah.
I believe a manager was, I can't recall whether it was an email exchange or just a call conversation, which somehow became public and it got so much trolling. And you're right that someone in the Gen Z generation, they're going to do their homework, right? They're going to go to websites like Glassdoor and Fishbowl and so on. So there is an impact at the organization level. So let's now kind of take a step a notch down. You've talked about what toxic behavior could look like, the impact at the organizational level. Let's focus on the Gen Z generation. If I'm a young Gen Z coming into an organization, a top brand, and I'm very excited, and there I have a bad boss. So what's the impact for the Gen Z specifically, for considering they're new, they're beginning, and how it can impact them professionally or even personally?
Great question, Nikhil. I think the personal and professional lives have now become very intertwined. They always were, but today the Gen Z comes and values. One is work-life balance. We've all heard about authenticity. Empathy has become even more important with the recent COVID crisis that we had, and then transparency. And with all these things, they look for the positive work environment. So I think the first foremost thing that if you're with a toxic boss and happens is disengagement. They're very conscious, they're very aware of the emotional impact that is happening on them. So for the fact like, oh, I don't feel good today, right? And it's the one day that they don't feel good also obviously kind of gets publicized in a larger sense, but they're not feeling good is very important to them. And so the disengagement happens. I also think this generation compared to the others is a very insecure and a low self-esteem generation, right? We've all heard about the fact that we're all driven by the likes on our Instagram, how many viewers we have. And it really talks about how, and the number of suicides that we have been hearing around the world, increasing in the population, which is just 13 to, the 21, 22-year olds. So the mental health gets impacted if you have somebody, a boss who's criticizing you, is sort of breathing down your neck, you're not getting appreciated. There is one study that I had read upon, which, Nikhil, if you'd guess, how many times, how many people want to be appreciated in a day? What is the percentage do you think there would be of the Gen Zs?
No idea. Go ahead.
65% of Gen Zs wanted one appreciation a day. And guess what the remaining 35% wanted? It's not no appreciation. They wanted at least 2 or more ways of being appreciated in a day. So you just think about their esteem at where they want and what they want, and then how much can the mental health be impacted with.
Yeah.
I think the third is really about then goes to burnout. I remember in the last organization that I was working in, and we had an employee engagement survey that most organizations would have. We had a question, and we were, again, a tech company, a very new company, started in 2020 with majority, I think about 35% people being in the Gen Z space. In our engagement survey, our burnout rates were always one of the top 3 lookouts, with high scores. But if you looked at the sub-question, the HR team would always be like, oh, but when we say that, do you have enough workload? They would be like, no. Ranging 80, 90%, not enough workload, which is fine, which is great. Do you have flexibility? Yes. So we always wondered what was this burnout then, because a typical, question around burnout has been working beyond the 9 to 5 for the Western world. In India, obviously, it's taken for granted that you spend about 12 hours a day working. So it wasn't the long hours. It wasn't the fact that you were working from home and, the whole hybrid workplace that we're talking about today. But it really was about the negativity that they were feeling emotionally and mentally. The draining that was happening due to not just being in many meetings, but the way that those meetings were conducted, the way people spoke to you. So that was the burnout that we're seeing a lot more in organizations and, the Gen Z getting impacted by it. Overall, I feel all relations get impacted. The Gen Z is able to, if you have a toxic boss, it impacts the way you relate to your colleagues, the way it relates to your personal lives, etc., because of the overall impact it has. So I think those are some of the major impacts, and primarily then it happens to quitting, right? They're just unhappy and the job hopping. I think even the millennials are known for their job hopping, and I'm a millennial. I was known like, oh, every couple of years you kind of job hop, and it's always seen as negativity. But I feel like today it's important for managers to also organizations to understand why it's happening. I'm not saying you job hop every other second, which I think is this instant gratification story that we hear of Gen Zs, that if you don't like this, let's move on to the next thing. Uh, but I don't, that's what's happening as well. But I don't think that's a great strategy either.
Okay. No, so wow, again, I think you have lots of good points. Uh, I can relate to your point about engagement scores. Sometimes I've seen companies who have high productivity and people are very unhappy because there's a burnout. In your case, you were talking about there's less work, but nonetheless, there's a burnout. But I do want to just quickly on that point before we go to build other questions. There is also the view, just very briefly, sort of the devil's advocate, that the Gen Z generation is often felt to be a slightly fragile generation, and therefore, obviously, you do have if you have a toxic boss, we're going to talk through how can they deal with it. But what would you say very quickly if you have a quick response where also the need for them to rise up, in the sense that, recently we saw that whole debate about 70-hour work, and, people got all very excited. But do you also sense that, maybe just their own expectations of, how quickly they will rise, and every boss will just agree to what they want? I want to briefly ask you that. I think our focus is different, but do you sense, is there some merit in that lens as well? And if so, like, what would you have to say for the Gen Zs, saying that, perhaps, not so much that if you have a bad boss, just gonna swallow that, but I'm saying, also more generally in terms of the patience required to rise up and so on and so forth. So they're connected. So I thought, take your view on that.
No, I think it's very important because I don't think that we have to side by what's happening, right? And I feel this importance of the Gen Z toxic box, where I got connected to what is it? But we're in the state of transformation, right? And we talk about digital transformation, but I think this new generation is bringing a cultural transformation in many aspects. And with every generation, there is some cultural transformation that happens. But I think with Gen Z, at least we're seeing a lot in the organizations, the culture transformation. But it doesn't mean that we also tolerate or, the behaviors of Gen Z coming. You're completely right. Like I said, the Gen Z is the fragile, the insecure. And I think, again, as a parent of a 9-year-old, I wouldn't say that it's the generation. It's also the responsibility of the parents, the previous generation. And I think how we're bringing them up, and obviously what social media and many other things are doing to it. So a lot of things surrounding them. But yeah, I think the one big thing I would say is patience, right? The Gen Z needs to learn to be patient. And I think there's a big contrast again with, I think the Gen Z is also today, if we talk about the unemployment rates that are happening, the political geoeconomic system that's happening, it is difficult. It is difficult. And I think the Gen Z is facing a lot more of these very high contrasting environments to survive in. So if you go to Europe, I was speaking to certain IMD students from the IMD alumni that I'm a part of. There's no jobs available. We know the Europe crisis that is happening. You've paid tons of money, dollars. There's no jobs available, and you've done it from the best of university. Take for India, for example, you have the IITs, and we know that for the first time, even the IMs are not getting jobs. The IITs not having jobs. And the wars, there's so much uncertainty. The inflation is at the highest today, right, in most countries. So you can't pay your housing loans, your tuition. So there's just so much going on today. We know globally the tech layoffs that are happening. So how do they deal with this pressure? And their own innate personality is which doesn't help them. So I think while we say patience, but how do they develop when you have so many environments and pressures focusing, has to do a lot with them practicing, I guess, a lot more mindfulness, relying on support. Because today, and being digital, I'm saying more human support, right? Go to your family for support, go to your friends, stay with them, stay with your colleagues, have those water cooler conversations, express the frustration that's there. I think one of the other things that Gen Z is not comfortable is having face-to-face conversations, right? Everything is WhatsApp, it's a message on Instagram. That's not going to help in sort of. So even if you have a toxic boss, I think a lot happens. People don't realize it because again, your bosses are either a millennial or a baby boomer, etc. So they don't know about their behaviors either. So how can you be courageous, which you are already, but have courageous conversations? And I think they have a way and learning, and I think it's organizations' responsibility to also teach them how to have these courageous conversations and not just quit, not just go out there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. It's it's a perfect storm out there for them. With war and the Me Too movement, the fake news, the climate crisis, it's all happening. And I think when they're entering the workforce at a time when you have AI and then you have the AI plus, and so how do you deal with that? Okay, so that's one. I think this was. I wanted to bring this out because I think it's important for Gen Z to also hear, that perspective. Let's go back, I think, to the conversation about toxic bosses. You're now in, you realize, so I am a new Gen Z. I don't have a past reference point. I'm excited. I'm coming to this large organization. I've done the homework, and it seems like on my wish list I had 10 things, and that company seems to be checking off 7 or 8 of those. If I do get a bad boss, right, how do I identify one? Obviously, you've shared that in the beginning, but from the Gen Z's perspective, what can they be kind of looking for? And then second is, more importantly, how do they go about, kind of combating or the way to address that, right? They're new. Do they look for peer group help? Do they go to HR? So just some ideas there as well. So 2 questions.
Sure. So to start with the first one, in terms of what signs should you be looking for, and again, the caution here to the Gen Zs is there needs to be multiple of these signs repetitive. Then the
Good
one,
point. Yeah.
then the one incident that you kind of, and obviously if the one incident is large enough, then sure, please report it. But we've got to give the benefit sometimes to things that are happening in environment. I think the first, like we spoke about, is the lack of respect and civility. If you're finding foul language being used, if you're finding the shouting, and yes, managers can be upset but there is a way to express yourself, which is professional. You're not in an professional environment where shouting, aggressive behaviors can be used vocally, right? We're talking about the use of voice in that sense. So first look at that perspective. The second would be micromanagement. Are you being empowered today? Are they kind of breathing down your neck? Are they looking after the small little thing that's happening? Initially, as you enter the workforce, we have to train you as a manager. I would want to see, but once the trust is built, right? Micromanagement is also after the trust is built. So give some learning rope to yourself, and know that you have to build the trust when you come into the organization, and then kind of look at some of these signs that would be there. I think the other is unrealistic expectations and demands. And this can be a little bit more maybe in the South Asian or Indian context. I just want to sort of highlight this, considering we have a global audience, is where people tend to just dump or expect the 70-hour week we're talking about, which was an Indian thing, or, expect long hours of work. If a manager is dumping their own work on you, and expecting you to be done. And then also maybe taking credit in a larger forum for the work that you have done. Um, that is again something. And if you feel sometimes there are targets or things like, hey, the sales, we need to grow this, and you just started a career and you're expecting a 10x growth, it's unrealistic. It's just not possible. So be mindful. A stretch target is good, but there's a difference between a stretch target and having unrealistic targets. So that's the other thing. We spoke about a little bit of the unfair treatment when it could come to favoritism, etc. We're human. It's bound to happen. But if you're seeing outright when it comes to performance ratings, questions, I think it's also important to ask for data and not just go while you may feel in a certain way. So, but if data shows that there is unfair treatment happening to you and there are certain biases that are creeping in, that's another sign of a toxic boss. I think the last is the manipulative behavior that may take place again. So again, an example of this could be uh, they they treating you in a certain way in a closed room meeting or in a one-on-one, but then going to their upper management and talking shiningly about you, or they being emotionally unavailable to you. I remember an example of somebody sharing with me about a boss that in a one-on-one meeting, the person wouldn't even ask how you are, or a simple good morning when you walk around and passing by, right? It's just basic signs of this. But but when it came to the leadership team, the same person, the manager, was all very jovial, would display the best behavior out there, right? So it was a complete mask. And so the perception, if you went the skip level, was always like, oh, this is a person who's really nice. What are you saying? And we'd all be like, you know, not happening here. So they tend to manipulate things and behaviors. So those are some of the signs that I would ask you to kind of look at for when you are working. What can you do? I think in today's day and age, it's important to record everything. And be it emails, if you feel a certain way, and I have found it very difficult myself because recording doesn't come to, at least I think, the Indians very easily. We tend to have more conversations and feel uncomfortable putting things down on an email or capturing them in a certain way. But I think it's important today to capture these incidents that are happening so that tomorrow, if you have to report a concern to the HR, you have the data available, because data is going to be very important. Perceptions do not go a very long way, and that's fair as well, right? Because how do you kind of clarify those? Second, if you're feeling a certain way, report the behavior. If you feel safe in doing that as well, so you have to understand. I think the Gen Z, you need to understand what are the guidelines that are available, people who are available to support you when it comes to lack of ethical behavior, non-compliant behavior. So read the rules and policies about it, even when you join an organization, so you don't. And we're having a lot of startup culture today where some of these uh, policies may not be in place today, and then you're kind of stuck into what do you do in that sense. So I think you should be mindful and be aware of these policies that protect you from both emotional, physical, and sort of manipulative harm that may happen. Seek support, like you said, Nikhil. It's very, very important. We spoke about this a little earlier as well. Talk to people. Think about what actions can you do. Having good colleagues by your side. Again, EQ being contagious, you tend to maybe even find colleagues or people who think the same way about your manager. Try to get a variety of perspective so that you are more informed, right? It could be an isolated incident, which is fine. It could be happening only towards you. It may not be happening around you, but I think it's best that you find people. Also now organizations, if you're feeling emotionally down, mentally feeling stressed, anxious, There are enough hotlines and free counselors available that organizations provide. I think the Gen Z is more aware of their mental health, but these resources should be leveraged. There's nothing wrong in saying, hey, I'm having a bad time. I personally remember, to share a story, where I've had a phase where I was just feeling so disconnected because an incident that had happened. And I took help, I took professional help to understand what's going on here and how do I kind of practice it both from my peers to deal with it, right? Because I may not be able to change the manager, but how do I want to still stay in the organization? So how do I change my ways of doing it, which does not lose me as a person, doesn't make me less authentic or reduces my self-confidence, but it's about drawing boundaries, which is another great way. You've got to draw boundaries, which means having those tough conversations. Don't let uh, you know, do this quitting thing or be a submissive employee that, okay, I'm just going to take it. It's okay to say no. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to say, I did not like the way I was spoken to. I don't, and in a way that is understanding and empathetic. I don't think, again, we need to be very loud and aggressive, because there is a feeling that may come into you about taking revenge, being upset and angry, right? So you've got to manage your own emotion as a Gen Z, and take some time to reflect and say, how am I going to approach this? Which is then being able to draw boundaries, say no, and clarify expectations, right? I think if your manager doesn't, and one of the things I do a lot of with my team members that I work with, typically is saying, this is how I like to work. How would you like to work with me? And this conversation, I think, should happen within the first month or the first 3, 4 meetings you're having, to share, hey, I have this style, right? I'm somebody who wants to build the trust, who likes to delegate and empower. If you have a question, you come to me and clarify it. But don't do the work if you're unclear and get me to repeat that work for you. Every manager will have their own style of working, and they have to be authentic to their style, right? It's been 15, 20 years that you've been growing to a certain style. So they need to understand your style, and you should understand their style as well. So that I think those mutual expectations really, really help in setting some base fundamental ways of working with each other.
Yeah, fantastic. Wow, you had so much in there. I think it's a great response. I really liked your advice about just having evidence, and I think it's important. People may get startled to say, why look at it or why think that way, but I think it's important, and I think it's just good to put it out there that if you do have a disagreement, you don't need a way to prove your story or your points, or whether it's an email or a conversation. So I think that's very good advice. One thing I want to ask you, Nupur, from your own story, you mentioned lots of good things that one should do coming in and so on. Just a couple of points before we make some closing questions. You mentioned that in your own case, you were trying to, in a way, almost look within to strengthen your own self, considering that, hey, maybe this personal cross is not going to change, right? Can you say a little more, like what other things that a Gen Z could look at? This, in addition to everything that you mentioned, that they can talk to peers, they can, raise it with HR, they can, all the other things. So just quickly, because I think that to me is very important for them to be resilient, despite it could be a toxic boss, or just the fact that there's so much of that perfect storm that we spoke about, right? So any tips or anything that you can touch upon there?
Yeah, I think the one is sort of self-care, right? Putting yourself first and taking care of your hobbies. And again, I think we look at organizations or our jobs with, oh, this is going to be the most fulfilling area of my life. No, we have many areas of our life that can be very fulfilling. Sometimes we have bad relationships. personal relationships. We have, things that we go through, our friendships, and job is just one of those aspects of our life. And I think that has really helped me. Nikhil, I was 22 years old, 23 years old, and I had my basketball. I had my work that I enjoyed a lot. I had my spirituality and Reiki that I was doing. I had my friends. I would love traveling. And I would be very clear that yes, there are days when I would love to work. And there are days where I had to put in the 14, 15 hours or 12 hours also. There are days where I know I finished my work, right? I believe in smart work than hard work. And like I said, I'm a millennial. And I think today's Gen Z also prefers effectiveness and efficiency versus that. So knowing that you have various aspects to feel happy and fulfilled, see how you fill your cup through that, right? So the mental stress that one feels, the anxiety that you may feel, and everything, nobody likes to go to a workplace that's negative, right? But I think you've got to take a step back, and it's also a phase, right? Like I feel like if you're going through a phase, like I went through a phase where I had to deal with it for a couple of months. And then based on reflection, have the patience to find my own happiness in the organization, which you can, right? You have your peers, you have things that you can do, you stick to your work, maybe just kind of keep reflecting. But then it is about, once you've taken that self-care, is about having those conversations. If it's going to have consistent, like I said, obviously for repetitive actions, then you have to find another manager or, speak to the HR. But I would say have an open conversation. What helped me was having open conversations about it. I also feel like managers don't know what they don't know. And to them, we are people who are making them aware. And if we don't, then we're also doing disservice to other people who may follow, because the manager is not changing if they're not made aware. You leave the buck, you leave the ball in their court when you say, hey, I did not appreciate it, or I did not like, this was a challenge. I would like to be treated in a certain way. And then if the person, you've left it, right? I think it benefited me where I spoke, I became vulnerable, I became authentic of the impact it was also having on me. So I think a lot of managers don't realize by what they're doing, what impact is it having on my team, be it a lot of emotional. So I happen to go and tell my managers that, hey, I'm feeling stressed. This is causing me anxiety. I'm not able to be my best here because of what has happened. So, and then the manager took it very openly and realized that, hey, this is the emotional and mental thing that's going on. How can I support? And my relationship changed dramatically. And, she became more vulnerable. I could share a few things, and I was supported like I was never rough, in that. So I think the Gen Z needs to take responsibility and also, like I said, reflect on your own behavior. It doesn't happen. It's a two-way street. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, I think, again, excellent points. I like, I think maybe this is more applicable, Nupur, for other generations where we saw work playing such a big part of our life. And I like the advice that the work-life balance in its true sense should be given priority. I think for some of our other generations, we kind of reach a stage in our life and then we say, you know what, I'm not going to run on this treadmill.
Yeah.
There are other things that matter. So I think it is important for that young generation to also keep that in mind. Couple other questions as we just close out. Let's assume, so lots of good advice. Assume that you laid out so many good things. I'm saying that, okay, you did try, it didn't work out. You do have one final window. Let's assume that the Gen Z is walking out of the door. They do get that exit interview. And I know that in the Indian context, for a lot of times people play it safe. They just say, I don't want to rock the boat. Maybe I don't know, this is sort of like my bad credit history, and I'm just going to politely, shake hands and walk out. What's your advice there? Like, let's say that for whatever reason you tried, you did a lot of self-reflection to strengthen within. You went sideways. You took to spears, despite everything, right? I mean, there may come a point that you felt that not worth my time to battle this, and I'm going to go. What would you say as the exit interview as a way to avoid some of this?
So, tricky question. I don't think there's a right answer to this because it's very contextual to the organizations you're working with, how much trust you think, you have with HR, what's going to happen, where are you in your own life? If you need a strong recommendation tomorrow, then you don't want to rock the boat, kind of a thing. So I think you have to make it very contextual to where you are and what's happening. But I do feel like, I've had organized, no, say it in a way that compose your words. I think it's important to compose the language without being very harsh, being very critical, but don't leave. If if you can obviously share in the exit interview the reasons without being angry. I think managing your own emotions, again, I come back to that, is important. So how do you compose yourself and speak the truth that's there? And if you can't speak the complete truth, I think definitely sharing perspectives of what's going on in a way that's professional without maybe blaming or naming people then. Like if it's, trust me, the HR smart enough. And I don't think it generally happens to one person if there's a toxic boss. It happens to if you're in a larger team. And there would be a trend of attrition that would take place. And so it is then up to the HR to obviously see the patterns as well. But I would definitely advise on leaving some drops of hints or truths always on why what is happening. Because otherwise, how will ever, it just continues the same culture then.
Yeah, no, I think this is important advice because, again, as you say, if that's generation stereotype to leave quickly, it could be for their own reasons, but if they had to leave for other reasons like this, it is important to give the advice of, maintaining your composure and the emotions and how you say it. So I think that's good advice. Okay.
Yeah, Nikhil, we've seen, and sorry to interrupt, but we've seen that because of these things, because of the email coming out or the exit interviews, today organizations are overhauling their leadership, right? So there are actions today really being taken. So I think there is enough benefit and stories now than ever before to see the positive of speaking up.
Yeah.
So I think earlier we weren't party to this and we've seen more possibly negative consequences or seen no consequences, which has demotivated the earlier generations. But today I think the Gen Z at least has hope more than ever that action will be taken. And I think that's the most critical thing.
Yeah. No, good advice. I think the voice of employee has only gotten stronger, and so I think that's good advice. So, last question. It was such a fabulous conversation. We could go on. So, let's, as a way to close out, let's say you're an organization. Should you get a bad boss for whatever reason, right? Just from the company's perspective, ways in which some of that can be rectified, and more importantly, how can the companies, what can they do to help our Gen Zs? So there's two questions as a way to say that, okay, if I'm a Gen Z, I sense some of this, just what are some solutions?
I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation too, Nikhil, but what I'd like to structure this one in terms of the 2 points, and I'll look at the 3 stakeholders involved in this. The Gen Z themselves, the manager, the toxic boss, and the organization, right? So I think the 2 things I always say is reflect, right? Take a pit stop. What we call in F1, we talk about taking a pit stop. So slow down to move faster is a great thing. So as a Gen Z employee, I think reflect, connect. We've spoken about many ways, but reflect on what you can do with the intent of obviously continuing to stay in this organization because you enjoy the work and etc. that is happening. As a manager, I think without even an issue being raised, I think each manager today needs to start reflecting on their leadership style. And there are many ways that you can do that. So as a manager, you've got to reflect on, and if you've been like that because you've also been unaware about that this is what a toxicity is, it's time to take action around it. So reflect on your own personal style. And I think organizations need to also start reflecting on their culture, right? So have we been organizations, do we inculcate leaders to talk in a certain way, right? It's okay to, and it starts at the very top leadership. So I think organizations also need to step back and reflect on the fact that we have new generation coming in, and how do we change, not just for the new Gen Z, but for everybody. I think it's time that we really took that. So those are that's on the reflection. I think the second is it's time for constructive action. And I really mindfully use the word constructive because that's the positive take that we need to take. So we've spoken about Gen Zs, speaking up, being patient, and obviously acting upon a lot of this. The manager as well needs to start taking feedback, right? So we talk about reverse mentoring, 360-degree feedback. We, as a leadership development expert, we found that very, very crucial. So how do managers, and they can do this on their own. They don't need an HR or somebody from the outside to come and do it. It's a simple conversation you can have, which just means that you're more open to listening to different feedback that's there. Make it anonymous, make a forms that's there, and just get some feedback consistently about your style from different people. And I think for managers, like we've spoken about, just take the action of changing your behaviors. If it means training yourself in unconscious biases, training that may happen, if it means going for a leadership development program. So it's important that we take that. And the third for the organizations, I think, is 3-4 things for organizations is take action, which is if it needs to fire an employee, a leader, a manager, you're setting benchmarks, you're setting a role model so that others can follow. If we don't take actions as organizations, and this is obviously also to the HR, but you're setting the wrong example that's there. The second is have the right policies and the support frameworks to support the new Gen Z to take care, which means even putting the Gen Zs into training around having those conversations, being able to be mindful, be patient. So the organizations have to look at overall and see what support from a training perspective, policy perspective, do I take to support this transition that we're all into. So that's sort of the summary that I'd like to leave our listeners with.
Yeah. No, fabulous, Nupur. I really like, I think just to summarize your points about first on the manager side, I'd simply say that, look, it's a learned behavior, right? We don't know the amount of impact that we're creating or the lack of impact. And I remember a beautiful vignette we used to do in one of the past clients where, this boss keeps complaining, and then he eventually promotes someone. And the person who gets promoted eventually starts mimicking the same exact behavior. So I think there is there's a lot of merit in what you said and what HR can do with the culture and so on. And I also think this is so relevant in all your advice for Gen Z. I would also want to just emphasize that this is relevant for other generations, right? Why do we limit this to Gen Z? I think maybe this is just as applicable for a millennial to an Xer, or an Xer or someone to a boomer.
Completely agree.
Yeah. And so why hold back? I think there's a generational and contextual lens to it, but I think it's time where, work doesn't have to, you don't have to suffer to work, right? And so Fabulous conversation, Nupur. I'm eagerly waiting to get this episode out because this has been an episode that I've been wanting to do for a while. Very practical. I really hope every single Gen Z, every single manager, they may disagree to some of what they say if they, if they're listening to some of this. But I think there's such good advice both on the cultural context, on the manager side, and for the Gen Z. So we're really looking forward. Thank you once again, Nupur. I'm deeply grateful, and I hope we can see each other in our travels or work together now that you've taken on a new role, a new chapter in your life. So I want to wish you all the best. And before I close out, anything else you want to say about yourself, or where can people reach to you? Because you've shared such good tips, and maybe there are potential colleagues or clients or prospects or even Gen Zs who want to maybe tap onto you even further. Where can they reach you?
Sure. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, Nikhil, and thank you for having me. And, having this topic, I think it's been in itself a very healing conversation. But
Like a catharsis, huh?
it's been a catharsis to just think about all my experiences and what I've gone through. And I felt like, oh, why would people ask me these things? And why am I sort of so different to standing up and raising my voice around some of this thing? But I love the question and love the direction and the work you're doing to educate this. So thank you so much. You have been somebody that I've always looked up to in ways professionally as well. But I am only active on LinkedIn, and that's where you can reach out to me. Nupur Todi is the URL and my full name. I have started facilitating and coaching on my own as a freelancer, and I'm kind of really enjoying that. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's the best place to do so.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm sure people will look you up. Thank you again, Nupur. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you, Nikhil.